Hello out there, and welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. If you're watching the video of this, sorry if I'm fading in and out, but the audio should be fine. As always, you can find this on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, Twitter, all the things. We're all at Rivals Gamecock on all social media. Give us a follow on your favorite podcasting app. We're probably mostly going to talk baseball today, but let's get into a couple of recruiting notes really quick here at the top. No new portal ads for football after the two receivers that we talked about on last week's episode. In high school recruiting, I just posted the weekly recruiting wrap-up this morning on GamecockScoop.com, so you can go check that out with all of the official visitors we have so far for June, shaping up like there's going to be like 3 sort of major weekends in June. I guess the first weekend is technically May 31st, but first weekend into June it stretches into. I guess another quick note that I saw right before we fired this up, one of South Carolina's top 2025 targets, the number 2 linebacker in the country, Zayden Walker, announced that he's planning to commit on July 5th. Which the way that I see it right now, South Carolina will get the last official visit of his top group. So right now I see he's going to Georgia on May 31st, Miami on June 14th, Penn State on June 7th, and he'll finish things up at South Carolina on June 21st. And you can see all the other guys that'll be there that weekend on that weekly recruiting wrap-up. Another quick note on Zayden Walker, for those of you who aren't familiar with him, he's the brother of Jalewis Solomon, 2024 commit. So South Carolina feels like they're in pretty good position there. Obviously, those schools I just read off, especially Georgia, big-time competition, especially for one of the top defenders in the country. But yeah, South Carolina seems like they have a pretty good shot there. They also have the number 1 linebacker in the country, Nathaniel Owusu Boating, coming, I believe is a different weekend, June 7th, 14th?
That would be the next Friday, the 7th.
Yeah, I think that's right. So, but yeah, so you can read that whole list on GamecockScoop.com. On the basketball front, we saw Trent Noah, who was one of the 2024 commits out of high school, out of Kentucky, decommitted from South Carolina. South Carolina let him out of his national letter of intent. We think likely to end up in Kentucky. He even alluded.
He said he wanted to play closer to home.
Right, which Kentucky, of course, has had a little bit of coaching turnover this offseason. He wasn't originally offered by Calipari, but it seems like Pope, that's who's there now, right?
Yeah, Mark Pope.
Has turned his attention there, and he's a Kentucky guy, probably grew up a Kentucky fan. So, understandable. Also, probably wasn't expecting to have to compete with Cam Scott at that position coming in to that 2024 class. So that opens up another scholarship for the basketball team. We'll see where they go with that, but they already did land a transfer portal point guard pretty much immediately after that. Jamari Thomas out of Norfolk State. He last year averaged 16.9 points, 3.8 assists per game, and he won the MEAC Player of the Year for Norfolk State, who usually a pretty good program down there. They've made it to the tournament several times.
They pulled an upset one, not with him on the team, but like they were a 15 and they beat a 2 seed one year, I think.
Yeah,
in Missouri.
Right. Yeah.
On the South Carolina front of that's relevant. I talked last week on the show about, I don't necessarily want to do the plug and play thing. I think these guys kind of are their own thing, but also you can see the pieces. You can see Lamont Paris kind of trying to catch lightning in a bottle twice with the formula from last year. Got the guy who will, I'm not going to call him replacements, guy who will play DJ Mack's spot with Nick Pringle, guy who will try to play Josh Gray's spot with Jordan Butler. And I think this is pretty clearly a guy who will try to play Talon Cooper's spot with Thomas here. Point guard, veteran, played a lot of college basketball, got the scoring numbers there, the assist numbers you saw. I don't think he's going to be quite as prolific a passer as Talon Cooper was, but also the flip side of that, we were talking about this before you got on the show, you're going to have to make up some points from somewhere that you're losing with Michi Johnson from the backcourt. And I think he helps the actual scoring kind of balance back out for this team.
Yeah, it seems like he's a little bit more willing to shoot it than Cooper, which to Cooper's credit, he was highly efficient. He definitely pick and chose his spots and usually made them when he did. But yeah, he's this ad is going to be a little bit more prolific on offense, I think. And there's still one more scholarship open. We'll keep you in the loop on who they add, probably a portal guy at this point. We were talking to Steven Anderson, another of our writers at Gamecock Scoop, and he mentioned that his intel was they're going after a big man, but we'll have more details on that as it progresses. On the football front, well, let me read the direct quote. This is from Yahoo Sports writer Lulu Kessin. It's from the Greenville News, I guess, but I guess Yahoo's a syndicate with Greenville News. So anyway, seems like that's allowed. So at the Florence Gamecock Club event, what's it called? Welcome Home Tour.
The Welcome Home Tour.
Yeah, Welcome Home Tour. Beamer said, I'll tell you guys what I told Lenore Sellers and all the quarterbacks coming out of spring practice. That coming out of spring practice, Sellers is our starting quarterback. And of course, he immediately followed that up with saying that everyone's going to run a headline saying that he named Sellers the starting quarterback, which I guess he technically did, right? Like at this point, we're getting into like semantics on the wording of it. We kind of already said coming out of spring that he essentially was. Now it's been sort of confirmed out in the open. I think maybe the interesting thing about this is it sounds like he talked to both Sellers and Ashford prior, obviously, to telling the people at the Welcome Home Tour. And Ashford's still here, right? Like the portal's
closed. Yep.
So I think that's encouraging. We don't know exactly what has been said one way or another to him, but it seems like you have two strong options going into the summer, which they're on a little break right now for May, but then things will get going in earnest in June and here in a few weeks.
Yeah, I mean, we talked on the last, really pretty much since December, about that need for a second quarterback in the room, in the rotation. If that's true, well, I shouldn't say if that's true because they have no reason to think it's not true. I think that this played out the way pretty much exactly how we thought, that Sellers was going to be given every opportunity. And as long as he played well in the spring and made the progress they wanted to see, it was going to be his job to lose. It seems like he didn't lose it. And Ashford, I guess, pushed him a little bit, is still in the room to back up. I imagine we'll push him in camp. Shane can say he didn't name him the starter. I'm not, short of an injury, knock on wood, obviously, I don't know what could happen in 3 weeks of fall camp that would have Robbie Ashford jump over Lenore Sellers. You know what I mean?
No, I agree. But for me, a lot of the question, and this was part of the issue when they were looking for essentially a backup in the portal, was whether or not a veteran like Ashford would be willing to take that backup role. Seems like he is. And something that he kind of said when he landed here at one of the first press conferences was that he didn't feel like he got the development that he wanted at Auburn. So, maybe he's still feeling like that's going to happen regardless. And yeah, I mean, we've seen it was just 3 seasons ago that South Carolina started 4 or 5 different quarterbacks because of injuries and because of all sorts of other stuff. So it is important, and you don't want Sellers going down to feel like it has derailed the possibility of anything good happening for your entire season. And at the moment, at least, I feel like your quarterback room is set up to weather a blow like that.
Yeah, I think we have this conversation every year, and I think it pretty much applies to every team, or maybe like 95% of teams. But like, if your starting quarterback goes down, you're just having a different conversation anyway. That's not a South Carolina thing. That's just a college football thing. I mean, your expectations are lower, your win total's lower, the plays you have to call are different, the way you have to scheme is different. Like, every conversation changes if you have that anyway. But within those confines, I think you did about as well as you could do for a break glass in case of emergency.
No, I agree. And then a couple weeks ago, you went to the Columbia Welcome Home Tour stop. Any sort of, I guess, major takeaways from that? I know he spoke a little bit about the freshmen and how they developed this spring.
Yeah, he had a comment. I can't remember if it was just something he said like in his speech or if it was a question someone asked him because they do the like Gamecock Club members can do an open mic for 15 or 20 minutes or whatever and ask him questions. But he said there's not a single freshman where we say he's definitely Jesus. There's not a single freshman where we say he's definitely a year away and not ready. So the implication there is he thinks all these freshmen are ready. Some of that's coach speak. I don't think every single member of this class will play immediately week 1 against Old Dominion. But I don't know if you had to choose a few freshmen and you think maybe he's thinking about these people when he says this comment. Do you have anyone in mind who you think's most likely to play? I think Dylan Stewart's the name that jumps out.
Yeah, Dylan Stewart's a pretty obvious one. I think if you're going to stay along the trenches, hashtag trenches, that the coaches have been really emphasizing in the past couple of recruiting classes, because that is where games are won and lost, especially in the SEC. Then you would have to talk about the offensive linemen. So Blake Franks, Josiah Thompson, obviously, who's already there.
Cam Pringle.
Cam Pringle, who's coming in the summer. I mean, I think at least one of those guys will have an impact. Thompson probably has the inside track there. He seemed the most college ready of the three anyway. Maybe a little bit more of a dark horse name, Mazio Bennett.
Yeah.
You've pretty much flipped your wide receiver room to a completely different room at this point. But it seems like he did some good things this spring, and he even flashed a couple times in the spring game, and it wouldn't surprise me to see him make a little bit of an impact as a freshman. What about
Yeah,
you?
I think what you've done in the portal, especially again, like we talked about on the show last week, adding the extra 2 receivers last week, you've kind of taken the pressure off him, especially him, but all the other receivers really just being able to spread the ball a little bit more. I don't know if Mazio Bennett would have been a every down starter anyway before that, but now he's definitely can kind of work along at his own pace and get comfortable with the Norris, and you don't necessarily have to rely on him to catch a few balls every week anymore.
Yeah. I guess one more name that I'll bring up is Jalewis Solomon, who we mentioned a little bit earlier. I mean, he really has like early round NFL corner potential, at least according to those in the know that were scouting him as a high school player. And one of the reasons he wasn't rated higher was because he was kind of rated as an athlete. Some people were recruiting him as a receiver, some people were recruiting him as a corner, but most people assume that his upside is larger as a corner. So you still have that corner spot that's Vakari Swain, Judge Collier. Um, there's one more name that's escaping me right now. That's still being kind of
I
competing for
do
that spot.
I do think though, like you make an interesting point though, what the last 2 years, and maybe they wouldn't want it in the first game because of an injury, like it's been the last 2 years, but it's been safety those years. Nick Eamon in 2022, Jalen Kilgore last year in the opener. The secondary players have kind of been true freshmen. The freshmen who have made immediate impacts have been in the secondary. Shane Beamer's talked a lot that the further away you are from the ball, the easier it is to make an impact as a true freshman, just from a size perspective. Obviously, you're not in the line of scrimmage lining up there. I think you might be onto something there with Solomon, just because there's a chance for reps at other corner spot, like you said, and he kind of fits the profile of other true freshmen in the Shane Beamer era who have popped immediately.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's the question to me, if he does beat out Vakari, I still think you find a way to get. I mean, he flashed again in the spring, and in the spring game, you still find a way to get him on the field somehow. I mean, he had some experience as a receiver in high school. I think he'll definitely get a look at punt returner. So
Yeah.
that whole group really is going to be very interesting to kind of watch going through the summer, I think. I think that's pretty much all we had football wise right now, but I do think maybe starting next week, we'll start to break down what the depth chart looks like on defense. And then the next week we'll do depth chart on offense. because I think we're pretty much have our roster sort of settled in at this point. I do think that they're still trying to maybe add one more offensive lineman, just because, as Beamer noted, they want just numbers wise, another body or two there. But it seems like the portal period is closed as far as people entering it. I mean,
Yeah.
grad transfers still could, I think. But otherwise, your roster is kind of set the way it's going to be for the 2024 season.
Yeah, and you're also at the scholarship limit right now. I know you don't have to be at or under it until I think it's the Tuesday before your first regular season game. So you could go over and someone else could leave the program later. But you have to keep that in mind too, that you don't actually have a scholarship right now. Although it could be I'm blanking the kid who just a Jackson Hughes situation where he's not on scholarship, but he comes into the program in the summer kind of deal.
Right. No, I the numbers always work out, right?
Yeah.
That classic. All right. You want to talk some baseball? It's
Yeah, that was a weekend.
getting crunch time here, right?
Yeah.
So let's start, talking a little bit about last weekend. Also, we could talk a little bit about last night. But so last weekend, South Carolina wins 2 out of 3 on the road against Missouri. It was not always pretty. It was kind of an up and down weekend, but you win 10-2 on Friday, lose game 2, 8-3. That one just got away from you. And then you win the rubber match and take the series with a 9-4 win on Sunday, but also was still a little up and down. Dylan Eskew got run off the mound in the second inning of that one, and you kind of had to get bailed out by your bullpen. Luckily, the bullpen has shown throughout the season that they can be depended on at times, such as that. But I don't know. It was a series that you had to win, that you were expected to win, that you really just kind of held serve on, I guess,
Yeah.
and kind of set up these next 2 series, which we'll get into here in a minute. What were your other takeaways from the Missouri series?
Yeah, it's just a screwy weekend all the way around. Your 3 starting pitchers go 5 total innings. Kimball doesn't make it out of the second inning Friday. Eli Jones doesn't make it out of the third inning on Saturday. Your offense wakes up big time late. Cole Messina, I think, was like 7 for 11 at the plate or something ridiculous like that. Won SEC Player of the Week.
Yeah, exactly. And deservedly so. He had an incredible weekend.
Defense very up and down. Had a couple really nice plays Sunday. Austin Brindling saves a grand slam with a robbery, but also you had a couple errors on Saturday that lead to some runs. Just a weird series, but you found a way to win it. I think that's first and foremost, obviously, the takeaway. And like, here we go, right? Like, you're kind of rubber's going to hit the road here. You've got 6 you take care of Winthrop last night, 15-3 in your last midweek. You finished the year 12-1 in midweeks.
Which let's pause on that point for just a second. I think that's pretty essential, right?
Yeah.
There have been times where those midweek games kind of ruin your and they ruin your chances when it comes to because at this point South Carolina is firmly on the bubble of hosting a regional or not. It's going to be kind of touch and go depending on what happens these last 2 series. If you trip up on a couple more of those midweeks, I don't even know that you're in that position at this point. So there is some credit, and also I think it credits the pitching staff again, that you had several young pitchers throughout the year kind of step up in those midweek starts.
Yeah, it's a good point. You've been pretty much throwing freshmen out there in these midweeks. Eddie Copper before he got hurt that first kind of half of the year. Tyler Pitzer, Jake McCoy, those guys have all been pretty solid in the midweeks. You always expect the offense to be there in those games against those lower level pitching staffs, but it's always a question of pitching, and for the most part, it held up. All right, 6 games to go, 3 at home, 3 on the road. You got a red hot Georgia team coming in this weekend who just swept Vandy. You got to go to number 1 Tennessee next weekend. Probably 3-3 get you to a hosting line. 4-2 for sure. I think 3-3 would also do it. Here we go.
Yeah.
No midweeks left. 6 SEC games. Crunch time.
Yeah, if you somehow win both series, I think you pretty much guarantee you leave no doubts. You take it out of the committee's hands, all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But I do think if you just win one of the 2 and don't get swept, that you'll be in good position. But like you said, this Georgia matchup, we were kind of targeting it earlier in the season as like, oh, this is part of the easier stretch. You're getting to
Yeah.
host a Georgia team that at that point was fine. You know, they weren't setting on the world on fire. But lately they certainly have been. You go back to April. So they won a series against Missouri, won a series against Ole Miss, won a midweek against Clemson,
Yeah.
had a tough loss against Texas A&M, but who doesn't? And then, like you said, last weekend they swept Vanderbilt, who, ironically enough, is South Carolina's one signature series sweep of the season as well. What do you see happening, I guess, this weekend? These teams feel like they're kind of mirror images in some ways,
Yeah,
but
you're kind of starting to play the Spider-Man meme here a little bit. Um, okay. Georgia has struggled on the road. I think that's a good place to start. They are 10-2 at home in the SEC play, 3-9 on the road. Their road series have been brutal. That's also part of this. They've been to Tennessee, they've been to A&M, they went to Kentucky, and Mississippi State was the fourth one. So maybe that's some of it, but I think you definitely feel like you got it in your ballpark. It's a team you probably are more talented than, even though I think it's probably close. I don't know what you do with Charlie Condon. I think that's kind of the question everybody looked at. It's a question Mark Kingston got asked a couple times today. He just kind of joked, you throw the ball to the backstop. For those who don't know, Charlie Condon is Georgia's best hitter, probably the best hitter in college baseball. He's homered in 7 straight games. He's got 33 home runs this year, which is just stupid when there's still 2 series left. Just walk him every time. That's kind of what I would do.
Yeah, I did see you tweet last weekend when they were playing Vanderbilt and he had hit his second or third home run in the series or whatever it was. Yeah, like why are we still pitching to him at this point in the season? Yeah, I do think that there'll be a little bit of a strategy depending on who's on base and the situation and all that. Obviously, I don't think you're going to walk him every time, but it wouldn't surprise me if we see a couple intentional walks throughout the series. And it really feels like, yeah, both teams' bats are kind of peaking at the right time. Like you said, South Carolina scored 15 runs last night as well against Winthrop, which it's Winthrop or whatever, but I think that that's a good indication that at least the bats that have woke up the last couple of series, the new lineup, all those sorts of things, are still functioning heading into the weekend, which is what you hope. And I think it could be a series of very high scoring games.
I was going to say, I see a very high scoring series here. Neither team's announced a pitcher for Saturday yet. Thursday, Friday, Saturday series this week. So that's game 3. You need to get your starting pitchers back on track, though. I think that's kind of my other takeaway from last weekend. And I know your bullpen was lights out over the weekend. Garrett Gainey, especially, I think deserves a shout out. He pitched in 2 of those 3 games, 6 innings shutout over the course of the series. Eli Jones, 2 straight struggling starts. I know Georgia's a tough lineup to pitch to, but you need some length out of him for sure. You need to get him through 5-6 innings, just to, if nothing else, get his confidence going again before the postseason. You're kind of doing that Roman Kimball, Ty Good piggyback thing on Fridays, but even that only got you through 6 innings, 5 1/3 on Friday last week at Missouri. Like you're going to give up runs, you're going to give up homers. I'm not under an illusion you're going to shut out one of the best lineups in the country, which you're going to face this weekend. But if nothing else, you need some length out of these guys. You need your starting pitchers to take a little pressure off the bullpen.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I also think it's really interesting what you do on Saturday. Let's say Saturday ends up being a rubber match, right? Split the first 2 games, and then Saturday is the decider. Do you trust Dylan Eskew with how up and down he's been with his last start on Sunday, getting rocked pretty early? Do you roll him out there, or do you roll the dice, I guess, with someone else? Maybe one of your midweeks, maybe one of the younger guys that has been coming out of the pen, maybe a Garrett Gainey or Connor McCreary, who have both pitched very well out of the pen.
I kind of think if you get to that, first of all, obviously it depends who you use the first 2 games, how Thursday and Friday go from a pitching standpoint. I also don't know if there's a scenario where you get out of the weekend or where you win the series without SQ pitching at some point, whether that's out of the bullpen or otherwise. So you're going to need to use him eventually. And honestly, like if you got to Saturday with the series tied, and that's your series decider, that game decides if you need to win one game or have to win the series at number one next week to host, probably. Like, everybody's available. Like, that's basically, you treat that like an elimination game, right? In a tournament. Like, at that point, that's the biggest game of your year. You don't have to worry about a midweek next week, so everybody's off for 5 days after it. Like, I kind of think you just throw the kitchen sink at it, and SQ's probably involved in there somewhere, whether that's starting or not.
And at that point, if you're going into it with that mindset, maybe you let him start because he has had some really great starts throughout
Yeah.
the year. I mean, a loss to
Kentucky.
Clemson, but a nice start there. 2.45 ERA, only three. He went three and almost four innings that day. Like you said, Kentucky, Vanderbilt. He pitched three solid innings. Arkansas. I forgot about this one. It was because it was also a loss, but it's one of
The
his
air's
better.
behind him. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say one of his better pitching performances. He went 5.2 innings and only a 1.59 ERA, but the errors and then things kind of fell apart down the stretch of that one. So he has proven that he can go the distance. So maybe you roll him out there, hope he does, and if he doesn't, then like you said, you have a quick trigger like you did this past weekend.
I think quick triggers all weekend. You don't want to do that. Like I said, I think it is vital to get some length out of these guys, but these games are too important at this point. It's too late in the season. There's too much at stake. You kind of have to quick trigger all weekend with everything, I think. There's just not enough time to sit on your hands. These are games you need to win.
Yeah, I think you feel much better about your chances this weekend than you
Yeah.
do the next weekend against Tennessee. Um, Remind me, that's at Tennessee or that's at
Yep.
home? Yeah, at Tennessee, right? So, uh, obviously, home series against Georgia, who is very good, very dangerous, very hot right now, but they're still not Tennessee, and also you at least get to host them. So I think you kind of view this as like you have to win this series so that you don't get forced
Have to win the
into
one
a
next weekend.
exactly you don't get forced into a must-win scenario on the road in Knoxville, which I wouldn't bet on.
Yeah, I wouldn't bet on it either. And then if you want to reverse engineer that, yeah, just like Kentucky, just like Missouri, you got to win the series this weekend.
Any other? I know you went to Mark Kingston's press conference earlier today. Any other, interesting strategic moves that he shared with the media? Probably not
He
very
kind of
many.
hinted that Garrett Gainey could start a game at some point, whether that because he
Mhm.
was a starter at Liberty last year, whether that's postseason or maybe SEC tournament. If you got to the double elimination portion, you needed something there. I think that's very interesting because he did pitch 6 innings in a weekend last weekend, so he's kind of got the arm strength to stretch it out a little bit to not just be a closer or a 1 or 2 inning guy. I think it was the Saturday Clemson game. He went 4 innings out of the bullpen, like. I don't think that's going to happen this weekend. I don't imagine that TBA starter for Saturday is Garrett Gainey, but I'm wondering in the future if that's a weapon you have if you got deep into a regional and needed someone to start a game or something like that.
Yeah, and I guess we're totally speculating at this point, but there's really 6 games left. So let's say you lose both series. Um, are your regional hosting chances squashed? You win one of two in both, whatever. So 2 of the next 6. To me, that means you're probably going to have to make a little noise in Hoover, which has usually not been a winning formula.
Your RPI would still be pretty good in that case. You'd have, obviously, like you said, you'd have a chance in Hoover. I just have a hard time with a team that didn't, from the committee's perspective, didn't finish above 500 in conference play hosting. You'd be 15-15 at that point if you won 1 out of 3, or I guess 2 out of 6 these last six games at that point. Florida did that in 2022, but they also went to the championship game in Hoover. Like you say, you got to make some noise there. I would never want to say they're dead hosting wise, just because it's a committee and weird things happen when human beings decide these things. But I certainly would not bet on it or think it's likely if they can't win 3 out of these last 6.
Yeah, I'm trying to see how the last regional hosts from last year.
I got it right here. You want to?
Yeah. Do
So
you?
it was You had 8 in the SEC last year, actually. All of them won at least 16 games. It was Florida and Arkansas won 20, LSU won 19, Vanderbilt won 19. They were national seeds. And then in the 9 through 16 seeds hosting, Auburn won 17, South Carolina, Kentucky, and Alabama all won 16. So 16,
right, well,
I really do. 16 with a top 16 RPI usually is a good bet to host.
yeah, I think deservedly so.
Yeah.
With their back against the wall, which we got to that moment about 2 weeks ago. If you want to go back and listen to our doom and
Post
gloom
Arkansas.
take,
Yeah.
that they have responded. But this weekend it is kind of, I guess, the end of that test. You have to pass this one, or maybe it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll talk more next week about the long-term implications, because I
Yeah.
still like we've talked all season sort of about where Kingston and his legacy lies, and
All the big picture stuff.
if whether or not Tanner is going to have to do something here or whatever. I think it's hard to put it all on like 2 series, but it does feel like some of it comes down to these next 2 series
Yeah.
and how that plays out, and whether or not you're hosting again. If you're hosting regional again, it'd be tough, unless you like somehow hosted it and then went 0-2 or
2 and
whatever.
Q, yeah.
But like I said, we'll break down all the scenarios after this weekend.
I did just look, by the way, in the history of this format. So since 1999, that 2022 Florida team is the only one ever to host without finishing over 500 in SEC. And like I said, they got to the championship game in Hoover with that 15-15 record. So
Right.
you pretty much, I'm looking at 16 here. It'd
Yeah.
be pretty rare to not do that and still host.
And I guess weirdly, this team, I mean, it depends on first round draws and all that, and we'll break it all down later. But weirdly, this team feels like one of the deeper bullpens that I can remember. Probably the deepest bullpen at the Kingston era, at the very least, which does lend itself to an interesting scenario in a tournament like that. But it'd still be hard to bet on you going.
I actually kind of like your odds in a regional at home. If you get that 4 seed on a Friday, or you can kind of save some pitching against a weaker opponent, probably a midweek type opponent. If you get that 1 seed in the regional and playing at home, you've got a bullpen depth. Founders in the postseason is pretty tough. Like, I actually think if you host, you can probably piece together a regional win. But you start going to a super, you're going to someone else's ballpark. Probably there's only 3 games. The bullpen depth doesn't matter as much. Like, that's where I think it starts to get pretty tough.
Yeah, and I also think it'll sting. Again, I'm starting to get into the weeds a little bit, but it'll sting a little bit more if you're not hosting and the team in the upstate is, after they were willing to make a change, and then we see how quickly they kind of turn things around. So
that might be a good place to cut it off, and we can see how these 3 games of Georgia go and come back next week.
Yeah, it'll be. I mean, this is a crucial weekend. I guess that's the simplest way to put it. So on GamecocksGroup.com, we'll have full coverage Thursday, Friday, Saturday for that. Any weather notes or anything that we've seen as far as?
It does look a little bit wonky for Friday. Tomorrow, there's some rain in the afternoon and blowing up again here, but it's supposed to clear by first pitch. Saturday looks fine. Friday looks a little bit weird. But it's cleared up a little, actually. Only 25% chance Friday. We might be good here. We might be good for 3.
And you start on Thursday, so you have an extra day. You have room for double headers, whatever. So they'll get it in. All right. But anyway, on GamecocksGroup.com, we'll have full coverage all weekend, starting tomorrow on that. So, and then we'll be back here next week to talk about it on the GamecocksGroup.com podcast. Till then, we'll see you later.